One of the cool things about the NFL draft process every year is you'll have those guys that you just know that they're going to be studs at the NFL level. You know they're going to be high picks. But you also go through the process and you find out some guys have been incredibly overrated and you can't believe why you ever thought this when this is actually the reality. Then you have other guys that just kind of come out of the woodworks and they end up being top flight type of prospects. Those are the guys that are sometimes fun to identify and fun to watch. And then sometimes you have those guys that just really, truly come out of nowhere and really make a name for themselves and then all of a sudden become a draft prospect when a year before nobody was talking about him. And when it comes to that category, one of the guys that definitely fits for this year's draft class is Foreman, the running back from Texas. Here's a kid that was a former three-star recruit, and a lot of people thought that you were just basically recruiting him as part of a package deal in order to get his brother, who was the five-star recruit, as a wide receiver. So he was really the afterthought. He was just kind of, if you want the five-star, you got to take the three-star twin brother. And it's funny now, 3 years later, it's Deontay, not his brother, that's declaring for the NFL draft. It's his brother that's still going to be in school. And it's Deontay who ended up with the 2,000-yard season as a runner in 2016. It's funny how that works out. And it's crazy how that works out. So you go from a year ago, a guy that literally nobody was talking about, nobody was thinking about being any type of marquee name for this year's NFL draft class, especially when it was supposed to be such a deep and loaded running back class. So all of a sudden he emerges 2,000-yard season, and now people are talking about him. It just adds to the depth and the strength of this already really, really good running back group. But watching Deontay Foreman on film was fun because it's fun for me to see guys that really come out of nowhere, to see those guys that you could tell have really worked hard and gotten that opportunity and made the most of it. And especially when you look at a guy like him, Texas wasn't a very good team this year. So a lot of teams were geared up to try and stop Foreman, and they still weren't able to do so. Watching him on film as a prospect, here's what's really stood out to me the most in terms of his best attributes, his biggest strengths. First, I got to look overall at the size, quickness, speed combination. Talking about a guy about 6'1", 245 to 250 pounds. Now, granted, he's not as fast or quick as guys like Fournette, Cook, Kamara, even McCaffrey. But when you look at the size and you look at the athleticism he does have and the quickness speed ratio that he does have at that size, it's pretty lethal. It's pretty scary. I mean, the dude is a really, really good athlete. Really, really good athlete. And can be a very dangerous runner because of that. It also bodes into with that size, quickness, speed combination, especially again that quickness, speed combination that he has at his size. He could be an absolute load if he wants to be to tackle one-on-one. I mean, could be a really, really hard guy to get down with arm tackles. He's a guy that can get a lot of yards after initial contact. He'll fight for the extra yardage. He runs with a purpose to me, runs pretty angry, and I like that in a between the tackles type of runner, which ultimately Foreman should be. But he really, really is tough to tackle for one defender on a relatively consistent basis. He's not going to make a ton of people miss in the open field, but would you really want to tackle this kid in the open field? I think that's a valid question. Now, we'll talk about his lack of receiving skills, and I will here in a moment or two. But the ironic thing is when you're looking at a guy like Deontay Foreman, you automatically assume north-south between the tackles runner because of his size, and that means he's limited to being a first and second down back at the NFL. And maybe long-term that bears out to be true, but I don't know if that's entirely true. Now, granted, you might be in a situation where you don't want to use him all the time as a receiver in third down, but there is some three-down ability there because with as little as he was used as a pass protector, or as a pass receiver, and really how ineffective he is when given opportunities as a pass receiver. I mean, there's really no expansive route tree whatsoever. Very, very limited there. His hands aren't all that particularly good, just not a natural pass catcher. The one thing that it did force him to do was to learn how to be a pass protector. And as a running back, to me, he was one of the best pass protectors I've seen on film for this 2017 draft. I mean, he was actually really, really good. He wasn't perfect, but again, 6'1", 250 pounds. He's going to be bigger than all the safeties blitzing. He's going to be as big as the majority of the linebackers that could be blitzing inside or off of the edge. So this is a guy that can anchor well at the point of attack. This is a guy that can get some push potentially in the running game. If you wanted to use him with a quicker back in the backfield, kind of go with a thunder or lightning combination. A guy that showed a little bit of a feel for me to be able to identify where the blitz is coming from, some decent instincts and awareness for that. A really good pass protector, though. So it's funny, for several of these other big name backs, pass protection was one of the big weaknesses I pointed out, and it didn't matter to me that much. But I think one of Foreman's biggest attributes is his ability as a pass protector. Now, he's not legendary. He's not a super stud at it, but he's really, really good, especially as a college kid with not a whole lot of experience as a player until 2016. So he could be a guy that has some ability to stay on the field in passing situations in third down, because if he gets any better as a receiver, then more power to you. But worst case scenario, you've got a guy they could use potentially as an extra blocker, which will allow you to send more receivers out, send another running back out, or send the tight end out instead of having to keep them back to protect. I also look at his work ethic too. And, I talked about before, when evaluating these prospects, it can be tough because, one, I'm doing the grading on a general basis without grading it based off of the individual team's needs, its system, the fit, the player personalities, all of that. I don't get the chance to interview these guys and find out more about them, to interview their coaches, be able to see their practice habits. But one thing I could feel pretty safely in speaking to is that D'Onta Foreman has to have a hell of a work ethic. Because in 3 years, he went from a 3-star recruit to being a 2,000-yard rusher for Texas. He went from being the afterthought of the Foreman twins to being the dude that's going to be potentially a day 2 pick in the 2017 NFL draft. That's got to speak something to his work ethic, his desire to get better, to improve, to play the game of football. And I love kids that work hard. Give me the kids that work hard, and you can make the most out of them. Sometimes you get those guys with the talent that kind of coast by on the talent. They could be great too, but then they only get to a certain point, and those are the guys that you ultimately win championships with. Guys like D'Onta Foreman that have to have those really great work ethics, in the weight room, on the practice field, in the film room. Clearly he had to work hard to get to where he was in such a relatively quick period of time. He had to have. So that's something to me that's really, really impressive. Now, he's far from a complete back, and there are several things about him, that I question and really hold him back in terms of his overall grading. First of all, his receiving skills. Like I did mention, there is some 3-down ability there, but it's only because of his ability as a pass protector. He has no receiving skills whatsoever. Questionable hands at very best, probably just flat-out bad hands. Not much of a route tree at all, just not much of a feel for route running and receiving. Wasn't asked to do it at Texas, and the limited times you saw him do it, you kind of see why. Very, very basic and rudimentary, nothing special there. Will he ever be more than that? I don't know. He strikes me as the type of guy that you'd want to hand the ball off to 18 times a game, but you target once in an emergency situation out of the passing game, and that's it. Ball security is a huge concern too. This guy puts the ball on the ground a lot, even as a 2,000-yard rusher. He had some really bad fumbles. Part of it, I think, was technique, holding the ball too far away from his body, going in between the tackles and not putting 2 hands on the ball consistently enough, sometimes holding the ball in the wrong arm. He's got to get better at that, because his primary way he's going to make a living at the NFL level is between the tackles as a runner, and he can't be putting the damn ball on the ground, because he's the type of guy you want to utilize in the red zone and goal line situations, short yardage situations, milking the clock late in the game. If he's putting the ball on the ground, you can't have him in those situations, and he's not going to be a receiving threat. Then what purpose does he serve? So he has to get better at holding on to the football. Just has to. Also, I think he's got to get a little more patient in terms of not always being so eager to kick the run out to the outside. Be a little more willing to wait for things to set up. You can see that at times. You get a little bit of happy feet, and you see the first thing and you take it instead of waiting for the best thing to open up. He did have just enough quickness and speed to be able to get away with that, and he should be able to get away with that at times at the NFL level, but you still want to see him stick within the tackle box as much as possible. Durability is going to be a bit of concern. He's had some issues with injuries. More so, I think there's going to be concern when you look at some of those injuries. and the fact that he runs a very physical type of style, he runs between the tackles. He could be a guy that is always a challenge to keep off of the injury report. It doesn't mean it'll always keep him off of out of games, but it could potentially impact his ability to stay 100% because he could always have ankle sprains and knee sprains and muscle injuries and back injuries and all of those type of things, foot problems, all those things that could arise from being a physical between the tackles type of runner. So how much is he going to be available over the course of a 16-game season, especially at 100%? And then you also got to look at the fact he was a one-year wonder. I mean, he really kind of came out of nowhere to be a 2,000-yard rusher in 2016. One-year wonder guys, sometimes it's because they were given the opportunity and they can, do some really good things at the NFL level. They've just scratched the surface of what they could do. And sometimes it's just a matter of timing and opportunity and they took advantage of it, but it's not an indication of what they can do at the NFL level. So you have to really dig deep and figure, this is really a one-year wonder. There's not a lot of production there. Now, granted, there's not a ton of workload on there, too, outside of what he did in 2016. But is he a guy that you could project getting better at the NFL level, or do you just maximize the opportunity in a crappy defensive conference like the Big 12? I think it's a valid concern and a valid question. In terms of his NFL comparison, I think he's a little bit taller Jonathan Stewart, a guy close to 250 pounds that has impressive quickness and speed for a guy of his size that can make a living in the NFL running between the tackles, but just like Jonathan Stewart has had issues staying healthy at the NFL level. It always seems that some type of nagging injury here, there, or everywhere. But when he is healthy and he is on the field, he can make a difference, but he's never going to be a superstar. That's kind of what Deontay Foreman reminds me of. And I his grade kind of reflects that. Now, granted, Jonathan Stewart way back when, what was that, 2008, when the Panthers took him and Ota in the first round. He was a first-round pick. I don't think Deontay Foreman's a first-round pick. I don't think he's a second-round pick in this draft. I think he's a guy that strikes me as a mid to late third-round talent that shouldn't go any later than the early portion of round 4. Because, frankly, right now, the only way he really impacts the game for you is as a between-the-tackles runner at the NFL level. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done on his game. Now, granted, he could work on those areas, and he could end up being a stud, and I wouldn't put it past him. But you're starting basically at nothing with him as a pass receiver. You're close to starting with him as nothing in terms of as a guy that can hold on to the football. And you've got some durability concerns, and you only have 1 year of college production to base everything off of. So I think a grade of 81.0, kind of a late third-round pick, is about where he fits. He's got some potential really good NFL fits, though. Cleveland would be one. I think he could be a long-term upgrade over Isaiah Crowell as that between the tackles power Jeremy Hill type of runner. Jacksonville, I think long-term he'd be an upgrade over Chris Ivory. Carolina, if they skipped on running back early. Washington seems to like their running backs to be kind of bruising, physical between the tackles type of guys. I think the New York Giants long-term, you have Deontay Foreman and Paul Perkins as a 1-2 combination. That sounds pretty nice, actually. So there are some good fits for him out there. And I think he could potentially be a guy that you get in the third, fourth round that puts together a decent NFL career. Similar to like a Brandon Jacobs type of guy. But expecting him to be a superstar, I think at this point in time is a bit of a stretch because there are many holes in his game, and I don't know how much better he's going to be. And there's also that danger of if he continues to have problems fumbling the football, he might find himself out of the league in 3 years.